Hello everyone, welcome to another live hangout here at Voice Essentials. We are in for a fun ride today. We've been having some audio challenges before we started the show, so I'm going to give you a heads up. There might be a little bit of a boomy sound in the audio when we hear Dr. Shannon talk, because we're having some issues with her mic. So just to let you know, there's nothing wrong per se. It's just that that's what we're working with. We are managing the model, so to speak, and that's all well and good. Dr. Shannon, for those of you who have not had the wonderful privilege of hearing her speak before, is a long-time friend of both myself and Voice Essentials, and I'm really looking forward to having what is always a lot of laughs, a lot of fun, and to boot, we get to learn something, and I'm sure today is going to be no different. So we're going to dive straight in. I really don't have any news to bring you, apart from, of course, next week we'll do a Q&A just so that you know. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so. Hit the white bell icon, and then you'll always be notified that when we're going live, which is Monday, Australian Eastern Standard Time at 1 p.m. And today is no different. And we are going to get straight into introducing Dr. Shannon Coates right after this.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
You would think after having done this 6 times, this is our 6th show together. I know. I was really surprised. Yeah.
That's amazing.
You would think we'd have this down by now. Evidently we don't. But that's okay. We're going to be fine. We're just going to take a Zen breath and we'll be good.
Yes.
Thank you for coming on again, because you always come on at 11 p.m. your time?
It is 11 p.m. my time.
Maybe that's what we'll blame for the tech issues. It's late. It's Sunday night where you are, Monday midday-ish where I am. Maybe the gremlins have got into the system. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
We because of our tech issues, I'm just gonna be full disclaimer today. We've had no opportunity to talk about what we're going to talk about. So maybe this will be an opportunity for us to really show just what true professionals we are, and talk almost making sense to subject that we haven't had time to collaborate on. But it is a subject that both you and I are actually very passionate about, and that is inclusivity of singing. And I have to reveal to everyone today's show, and in fact, in 2 weeks, I've got Dr. Trinice Martin Robinson coming on, and I'm getting her on the show for the same selfish reason I've got you on today, and that is you're speaking at the Australian National Association for Teachers of Singing, ANAT's national conference in October. I think it's October. You better check the date because you're talking at it.
It is October. I just looked at my calendar.
Okay. And I'm not able to get down to the conference this year. In fact, I've missed a lot of conferences over the last couple of years. And so I thought, well, I know both Dr. Shannon and Dr. Trinice. I'll just get them on the show to give me a preview of what they're going to say at the conference. Why not? So here we are, and I'm hoping that we can do that today. Sort of really talk through inclusivity of singing, and certainly the byline that you gave me was building more inclusive studios, clinics, and performance spaces. And before anyone maybe thinks to themselves who are watching, thinking, well, is this really going to be applying to me? Because it's all about, is this for singing teachers? We won't let it be that. We're going to be really talking to the birthright of every human being to sing. And I'm looking forward to having that discussion. we better just give you an opportunity to tell us a bit about yourself. What have you been doing recently? Because it has been 16 months since you were on the show last.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that's terrible. Yeah.
More surprises. Who knew?
Well, I only found out just prior to the show because I went and looked. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, what you've been doing?
Terrific. Thanks so much, Dan. I am a voice teacher and educator here in Toronto, north of Toronto, actually, not necessarily in Toronto, but so in Canada. And just 1 month prior to the pandemic, I released the majority of my sort of traditional voice students to focus on creating resources for voice teachers, and similar to the resources that you create as well, Dan, and some that are geared more specifically to voice teachers and to teaching and to how to teach better and all that kind of stuff more effectively. And so that has all sort of culminated now in the VoicePed Undegree, which starts in 2 weeks. Heaven help us all, but it's all good. So 2 weeks, the VoicePed Undegree, a 2-week two-semester, 8-month certification program. I mean, certified by me, so but it's not really about the certification, right? It's about, and it truly isn't, but it is a certification program for voice teachers where we're looking, very much student-led, modeled on my philosophy around teaching, which is that you have the information that you need already, and that you already know what you need. And so I'm not here to, I'm in the course, I'm giving a whole buffet of information and saying, now you've looked at this information, and now tell me where the gaps are for you, what's new information, how would you like to apply it? And now let's figure out how you'd like to be assessed on whether you know this information or not. So rather than me giving you the information and then me creating a quiz and then deciding, using that quiz to decide whether or not you have acquired the information, or a test or an exam or an essay or whatever, I'm literally, here's the information, and the course is for folks who have been teaching, so who have an understanding of who they are as voice teachers already, and who they are as, grown human beings as well. And so that it'll be a collaborative effort where folks come to me and in the cohort and say, these are the 3 things that I'm pulling out of this particular module that I want to make sure I focus on. I would like to have a conversation with you about them, so then and we can have the assessment that way. Or I would like to teach, and my intention is set on these, accomplishing these 3 things as I'm teaching. Please create a grading rubric around those intentions. And I will do that, and then observe the teaching, or, I'd like to write an essay, or I'd like to, whatever. However folks would like to have the assessment, that's how we're going to do it.
As you're explaining what you're doing with the Undegree, and I only learnt that you had moved to this model a couple of weeks ago when I was directing someone to go and enroll in your old version of course. Yeah. And I went, oh, she's not doing that anymore. She's doing this new Undegree thing, but that's a lot of work for you. To place back on yourself. Wow.
Yes. Well, this is. Again, this is very much a part of my teaching philosophy, where I want this to be something that is not me top-downing all of the information, right? Yeah. I do have access to information. I'm good at parsing information and, all of that, but here's all of the, here's a whole buffet. here are all the resources. And then voice teachers can, choose from there. So again, that is part of my teaching philosophy, which really actually ties into what we're talking about today as well, and what I'm talking about with ANATS as well, is the how do we create more inclusive voice studios, and not just inclusive, but how do we create more affirming voice studios? So we're moving from acceptance to inclusivity to affirmation, really. And so I mean, this whole, all of this is part of not just my teaching philosophy, but also part of my philosophy for singers and, as in life, where that not just the acceptance of a learning difference, of the fact that someone is coming from a different place, or the acceptance of all of the different things, and not then just creating inclusivity, which yes, and that is what I talk about a lot, but also then moving even farther from inclusivity and into affirmation. So that not trickles down, but that is the bedrock of how I'm putting together the undegree as well. So that, and I don't think that it is necessarily more work for me. Yes, there's more work in terms of perhaps needing to come up with separate, different kinds of assessments for different people. But first of all, there are going to be fewer than 10 people in this first cohort, which terrific. But secondly, I don't enjoy creating exams. I don't enjoy grading exams. I don't enjoy creating quizzes and grading quizzes. I really don't enjoy grading essays. Like, I really don't enjoy that. Like, I should never be an English teacher, ever. I do not enjoy it, because it's for me, creating an assessment tool that works for all different kinds of brains, and for all different kinds of experiences, and for all different kinds of training levels. It's impossible to create something that doesn't actually test most prominently for how well you take the test. So often, and I teach undergraduate voice ped class at the university, so I know this from my own experience, of course, but also from having children who have learning differences and who are neurodivergent, and so many other things. But so often, an examination tests, like a written exam especially, what does it test for? It tests first and foremost for how well you can take a test. And we've talked about this too in terms of auditions as well, right? So often, what are auditions testing for? What are you assessing in an audition? Are you actually assessing whether someone is going to be great for the role or the character you're casting? In some ways, first of all, you're assessing whether or not someone is good at doing auditions, And I would like to have and offer a far, a better assessment system, and who better to know how I want to be assessed than me? Especially because I'm working with grown-ups, right? So, so that also then comes back to inclusive teaching and inclusive singing, and barriers that we put up for singing as well, where our assessment process, well, you folks have in Australia, you have a similar conservatory system as we do as well, right? We have the Royal Conservatory of Music, which is a legacy from the Brits. Thank you very much, because they have their conservatory too, right?
They do.
And so, thank you. There are lots of positives I love a lot about that system, and about the examination system, and about the syllabi. There are lots of things I love about it. And there is also this so often unrecognized understanding that this is the best way to assess whether someone is progressing in their singing or not. And really, it's the best way to assess people who like doing singing exams and who can do well in singing exams, and who can remember, you know, who do ear training well, and who can learn exercises, and who can function in, you know, in a one-time situation under pressure, right? It doesn't say anything about whether or not you're going to be a great performer, whether or not you're going to be a great colleague, whether or not you're going to, you know, have something to say. I mean, there are so many things that this kind of examination system does not assess for, and yet we hold it up as a, you know, the best way to do the thing.
It's a real challenge, I think, facing institutions that have such a strong tradition of approach to education, that, you know, as the modern era forges ahead at a crazy rate of knots, and I know how agile I need to attempt to be in trying to keep pace with the change. And I'm just a little suburban-based singing teacher, able to pivot relatively quickly for an institution that is rooted in, you know, a century of history. I'm thinking of our local conservatory here in Queensland. Very different kind of game, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just pulled up my abstract actually for the keynote that I'm doing for ANATS, and the title is Pedagogy is Political: How Shifting fancy big word alerts, but here we go. How Shifting Sociocultural Paradigms Redefines Our Teaching. And really, I mean, what I'm talking about here is that for a very long time, dominant cultures have sort of justified continuing oppression of underestimated groups through pathologization, through demonization of those groups in order to maintain power and control. So women, Black people, people of color, Indigenous peoples. Australia and Canada have a similar history with Indigenous peoples, of course. Maybe not, of course, I'll say we do. LGBTQ plus, disabled people, neurodivergent individuals, etc. So all of these groups, the dominant culture has historically sort of marginalized and stigmatized these groups through the church and through the state. You know, the church has through these big institutions, really, right? And those and that continues to sort of that pathologization and that demonization sort of teach us that there it gets into our educational institutions, right? And so that kind of then translates into educational institutions sort of talking about how there is a right and a wrong way to sing, there is a superior art form, you know, there are good and bad students, that the role of the voice teachers to prescribe proper singing while sort of defending this like superior cultural style. Or superior art form, if you will, right? So and of course there are lots of shifts in those paradigms now. And I speak, you know, the major paradigm or lens that I look through is through a neurodiversity paradigm. So that, you know, I'm seeing how this shift in how we understand neurodiversity and neurodivergent individuals and how we understand brain function, I'm seeing that shift in the larger sociocultural context and seeing how that's starting to influence our institutions. But the institutions, as you just said, like those suckers do not move fast, right? They do not. But we still continue to take so much of our, you know, in the studio and as singers, we take so much from those larger institutions and those larger from the church, from the state, from the institutions. We take so much from those, and we we internalize in a way, right? And then that how what I want to do in the keynote, or what I'm planning to do, is to kind of pull some of those threads a little bit and say, here are some of the things that that make us think that there are good and bad singers, that there are good and bad students, that there are that there's a right and a wrong way to sing, and that the role of the voice teacher is to impose the idea, and to impose the right and wrong, and to teach the singer what is right and what is wrong in their singing. So much we want. Oh yeah, exactly. I love that comment, actually. Yes. So much of what we can do, and we've talked about this before as well, so much of what we can do in the independent voice studio, because we can pivot so much more quickly. So the agency, we have this ability to really be able to do the things that the big institutions cannot.
And I think, and thank you, Evo, for your super chat and your comment, because it really does speak to the heart of, I guess, what we're getting at today, and that is that we've got this. I know that as a young teacher, and I do have to go back a couple of decades to remember, but I was far less able to be what I now look back and see. Well, I don't think I really was inclusive to the degree that I would want to be, because as a young teacher, you're kind of just trying to build your own sort of foundation of teaching, and it's only and you feel like you've got a list of tasks that you've got to get done, and you've got this pedagogy that you've got to deliver, and certainly my pedagogical upbringing didn't school me in how to be inclusive.
Yes.
And I want to talk to an interesting observation about classical into jazz into contemporary in a moment, but the I know that now, as I'm a little bit older, and I've been doing this for a little while, it's a little easier for me to sit uncomfortably in a lesson, because simply, and the uncomfortability is no fault of anyone in the space. It's simply that what the student requires is not necessarily what I would normally do. Mm-hmm. And therefore, but yet in me feeling like, well, hang on, I don't feel like I'm delivering what I should, and therefore I feel like I'm undervaluing the lesson, but actually it's exactly what the student needs. And they're exciting lessons. Often at the end of the lesson, the student go, well, that was a great lesson. I'm thinking, was it? Okay, this is good. I'm so pleased you gave me that feedback, because I thought it was a bit of a train wreck. But and that's the challenge, I think, facing a lot of teachers, is that it's so difficult for a teacher to, you see those car ads. Here in Australia, we have car ads, and the car's driving along the bitumen road, and then suddenly it'll veer off into the desert, and it sort of goes off onto the dirt track. And most singing lessons, they kind of do stick to the bitumen, like we just traveling down a nice, smooth, paved road. And then every now and then you get a student that all they want to do is head off the beaten track, and they're exciting lessons.
Yeah.
But they can be a bit dusty, a bit rough and ready. But they're often the lesson you get to the other end, and it, like, the student's psyched, but that's that is a scary place for a teacher to be.
Yeah, I mean, I say that an anecdote that I use quite often, and again, going back to when I first started to teach, and so many of the folks who I worked with at the very beginning, And this was a through line throughout all of the teaching I've done, but certainly in the very beginning when I first started to teach, many of the folks I worked with were contemporary worship leaders and singers. And, I know, right? I know, exactly. And so I had, at that time, I had my Bachelor of Music in Performance in Western Classical Voice. And I was also, I was leading worship in contemporary styles, and, I had kind of figured it out for myself. I didn't know, and half the time I thought what I was doing was probably a little bit wrong, but it worked and it sounded right. So I just kind of let that go, And then when these folks are coming into their lessons, it was very uncomfortable for me because I'm like, there isn't anything I know to do here, right? I don't have anything to do because your high notes are great. I mean, it looks like you're maybe your head's back too far according to my classical, style, or maybe you're not taking a deep enough breath for classical style. But I'm like, at that time, I couldn't parse out the fact that this was not actually, the things that I thought were shoulds and we should be working on were not actually necessary. But I was struggling with the fact that, but it sounds great.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry, what am I supposed to be fixing here? I don't have anything to do. So that was some of my very first teaching where I just felt like, oh, okay. And then when I started to, work with singers who were like young singers and folks where I'm like, okay, let's get that Royal Conservatory in there because we've got the exercises, we've got the ear training, I've got the graduated lesson plan, I've got it all there, and now I've got something to do, and we can work on breathing, and we can work on alignment, and we can work on, not that those things aren't necessarily things to work on, but in so many ways, especially when we're talking about contemporary and popular music styles, so many of those things you really only need to address them if they're a problem, right? And if they're not a problem, then you don't really need to address it, right? You're singing the way you need to sing, and my job is to actually sit back and support your journey through the desert. And make sure I bring along a water bottle, right? To keep that analogy going. That's basically my job, is to say, yep, you're still fine. Let's keep going. let's see how far this desert goes, So, and that is an uncomfortable place to be, absolutely, especially with the background, with that kind of background, especially from an institution, when you've got that background from an institution, especially where there is the role of the teacher is so prescribed, and that's not necessarily useful in the voice studio. And that also then leads to that lack of inclusivity in a way, because we also then don't see the student or the learner for the holistic learner that they are. We see them as a list of checks and not checks. So we see a student who we perceive isn't practicing, for example, or we perceive that they may be lazy. I'm going to put big quotes around that. Or we perceive that they may be defiant, or they're not doing the thing the way we told them to do the thing, et cetera, et cetera. We have all these perceptions around students and around the learners who we're working with, the singers we're working with. And if we start to let go of some of our shoulds as the teacher, and we start to look at the singers we're working with, and understand that no one is intentionally a bad person. Okay, very few people are intentionally bad people. Very few. And likely no one in your voice studio is intentionally a bad person, So the people who I'm working with then, if I start to believe, okay, these are not actually bad people, this is not actually a lazy student, this is not actually a defiant student, this is not actually someone who is non-compliant, this is not actually someone who is, then I start to look for other things, and I start to think, okay, what are the other what are the other possibilities here?
Yeah.
And then how do I create a space where I don't even have to know that there may be another possibility here? They're able to come into that space and feel, and I'm speaking pretty specifically about neurodiversity here, but this does apply across the board to other, to other disabilities and to other people groups,
Yeah.
where when we start to intentionally set set up spaces that are intentionally inclusive, it's not just the people who are who we're hoping to directly affect who are affected. It is the entire studio. And this is, when we start to recognize, okay, I see these behaviors as a character flaw, right? So I see these behaviors, I have a demonizing effect for these behaviors. There's like a character flaw there, because if they're not practicing the way that I think they should, or I've told them they should, then they must be lazy, or they must be a procrastinator, or they must be, they must have no self-discipline. And so I see that as a character flaw, rather than saying, hey, what works for you?
Yeah. I wonder
Yeah.
whether we can talk to, as a person who is desiring of inclusivity within his studio, I'm also very, I guess, cognizant of unconscious bias.
Yeah.
And the danger of unconscious bias is I can't be conscious of it. And so, it's we're acknowledging that we all have blind spots, and this is where I wanted to just make mention of what I observed in my conservatory years. Was because I started in classical like yourself, and had at least 1 year. I had 2 years of classical, but one of those years was a very good. I had Margaret Schindler, who's now the head of classical voice, but it actually was her first year teaching at the conservatorium, and I was just fortunate enough to be, given to her. And so I had 1 year of classical tuition with Margaret, and then of course went across to doing jazz vocal. And it was interesting to me because, there was this real awareness within the jazz department of how frowned upon we were. We're kind of the dark side. But it's been interesting over a number of years now to observe how that very same prejudice from classical to jazz has now found its way, because of, dare I say, human nature. That very same prejudice is now, if you're not a jazz singer in contemporary, then you really don't have it. If you want to sing anything in contemporary, do jazz, and it's just a repeating of the sins of the fathers. Like it's, and I guess the challenge then is to see that, observe that, and go, wow, okay. Where is that going to potentially start to outwork itself in my pedagogy?
Yeah. I absolutely. The challenge, the thing that I talk to people about, or the thing that I talk to people about is when you are reacting to someone's behavior, and you're assigning a character flaw due to a behavior, that's when you start to question. And I'm not talking here about folks, where something is dangerous. And this gets very challenging it gets challenging for exactly what you're talking about, right? Like the internal bias, that bias, but also it's very challenging for, if I think that if I'm working with a person of color and I think that they are a lazy person, I need to figure out, why do I think that they're a lazy person? And what are the behaviors that I'm seeing that I'm attributing laziness to, that are part of my racism? Like, what are the behaviors that are part of, that I'm seeing? It gets very challenging. So that, I mean, and it's challenging because it's so easy to say, yeah, but they're acting this way. I can see that they're acting in XYZ way. And so the challenge then is to say, yes, but I perceive this behavior, and I'm assigning a character flaw to that behavior, rather than saying, what is the actual underlying reason? What is the actual, and it could be, systemic. It could be, like, there are so many reasons that behavior can be there, but what is the actual underlying reason, and is it within my power to create a space where that underlying reason is no longer there? So, and I would posit that in the Independent Voice Studio, we as teachers and positions of power in that studio, I would posit that we almost always can change something in the way that we're working that will alleviate the reason for the behavior that we're perceiving. And it's probably never going to be that this person needs to get, more disciplined.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And I mean, the same thing happened, like when you find yourself, maybe you're a jazz singer, and you find yourself saying, well, clearly they're not as good a musician as I am because they didn't have to learn modes or whatever, right?
Whatever.
So clearly they're not real musicians because of XYZ. Where is that coming from, right? Like, find that challenge, like ask yourself where that's coming from. As soon as we start to, and yes, I can see a comment there saying there's always some sort of trauma underneath flaws and issues. Yes, it's so often. And we are so much more aware too of trauma and the role of trauma. And I mean, one of the things with trauma that is that kind of goes hand in hand with this is that folks in, what I'll speak from that neurodiversity lens, neurodivergent folks tend to have a higher, I don't want to say a higher level of trauma, tend to, because trauma is so individual, and right now trauma is in some cases overused.
It's a bit of a buzzword, isn't it?
It's kind of a buzzword. Yeah. But at the same time, we know that simply living as a disabled person, living as a neurodivergent person, living as an autistic person, as an ADHD person, as a person with Tourette's, etc., in a world that is designed for a neurotypical brain, is going to, and if you're a disabled person in a world that is designed for an an able-bodied person, if you're someone who has a chronic illness living in a world that is designed for people who are able-bodied, that is going to impart some trauma. I mean, there is no question that is going to, at some level, is going to be traumatizing. And so then the reaction, or reaction might be the wrong word, but the protectiveness that needs to be there in order to protect yourself from that, from the impact of that is going to look like, if we are not affirming and questioning ourselves and being as open as we can be, that it's going to look like a character flaw, right? That's going to look like, oh, they're so, like, they never listen to anything I say, or they're whatever it is, right? That's going to look like a character flaw to us from the outside if we're not thinking about it.
Yeah, I can reflect on my own personal recent history. So many here in the Voice Essentials community know that my wife had bowel cancer, and we're all things being equal, we're through that chapter now. But during that time, we were, as a family and as individuals, we were going through great levels of trauma. But I can now see, when I look back at that period of time, we weren't truly cognizant of how that trauma was impacting our lives and the way we then communicated with others, the way we were even able to measure our own emotive responses. And now that we've traveled on and we've done some work around that, where we're now into a much more even keel. But for some people, the trauma has a continuousness. You know, it's not a moment in time. This is their lived, continuous experience, and it behoves us, not just as singing teachers, but as fellow human beings, to build an acknowledgement and an allowance and an ability to I'm searching for the right inclusive terminologies, to just allow that person to be, and not need them to adjust their behavior, because in many respects they're not in any condition to adjust their behavior, nor in some cases, nor should they be required to.
Nor should they. Exactly.
We are the ones. If there is any adjustment required, we are the ones that must adjust. And I think we're still, as a general society, we're inching towards that, you know, but we've got a long way to go, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, to bring it back a little bit, this is also part of the reason why our institutions and, you know, academia, for example, why it's so challenging to create those spaces that are not just inclusive but are affirming. So it can be so challenging because the institutions are not only coming out of this whole history, but they're also trying to work on this large scale. You know, I'm trying to create, and also trying to make some money, right? So like I'm trying to create this inclusive, you know, individuals within the institution working toward more inclusive and affirming spaces. Absolutely. But the institution itself is like, well, we've got to deal with, you know, 20 people or, you know, 200 people in a class. How can I make that inclusive? I can't make that inclusive or affirming. Like, it's 200 people. So we've got, you know, there's that additional challenge in the institutions. And again, I think in our you know, in our independent voice studios, we really do have the opportunity to create those spaces. An example of that is actually, you know, talking about makeup lessons and cancellation policies, which is something that can be a little bit of a touchstone with teachers, right? Because we feel like, oh, if I have a lenient cancellation policy and people can just like cancel, they're just going to take advantage of me, and I'm not going to make money, right? If I just like let anybody cancel willy-nilly, then, you know, people are just going to cancel because, you know, they forgot to schedule their kids' soccer practice or whatever, and then or you know, they wanted to go shopping or whatever, and then you know, and then I'm going to be out the money for that hour or for that lesson. And I would like to, I would love to change that, because what I would love to change, I mean, this also involves changing business practice and understanding, you know, how to set up a business and all that stuff, which you've talked to Michelle before too, but like just understanding that we can create spaces where people, first of all, recognize that if the reason that you have a punitive, I call it a punitive cancellation policy, recognize that possibly the reason that you have a punitive cancellation policy is because you view people as wanting to take advantage of you, and that may be part of your personal trauma and your personal history, and it may absolutely have been your experience. But recognize that and start to think about, really, are the people who I'm working with, who these singers who I love, are they really going to try to take advantage of me? Is that really what I believe about the people I'm working with? So think about that to begin with. But secondly, we can set up studios where people can have a mental health day. Where people are allowed to say, I just can't come to a lesson today, and where they can be honest about why they can't come to the lesson, and where you still get paid, and where you do something else for them during that time, right? So you create you create a playlist for them. You create a whole bunch of discussion points for the next lesson. Or maybe you just get in there on Zoom and do a listening exercise with them if they can't stand to, come into the studio, or there's too much going on. So, so then we're not creating these punitive policies that are not inclusive of folks who have mental health problems, but also folks with chronic illnesses, and folks who, who may have disabilities, where getting to a physical lesson place takes them, 3 hours because they have to, or it takes them 3 times what it would someone who can just drive there, or just walk there, if you will. So the actual energy we're imposing on that person to get to the lesson on time and to come to every lesson is, or to have, a regular lesson schedule, is quite punitive and not inclusive. It's ableist, So if we can have those, if we can start to think in those kinds of ways, like how would I set up my studio if I really believed that no one was going to take advantage of me, if I had a completely open cancellation policy, and I affirmed people when they said, I just can't come today, I'm just too overwhelmed, I have no spoons left, I cannot sing today. And we affirm them rather than even just being inclusive, and we say, I love that you are taking this time for yourself and that you recognize this. Amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. I will create a listening list for you of my top 3 favorite musicals, and I'll tell you why I love them.
What are your top 3?
Sorry?
What are your top 3?
Oh gosh. That is I don't think I could answer that question.
I didn't think you could. I love the fact that you're taking what is on the surface of it quite conceptual, and really dragging it down into, where the rubber meets the road. And that's a really challenging place to be brought to, because we're not allowed to just discuss it as a concept. How do we apply that concept? As a person I have a cancellation policy in my studio, and that's really good food for thought. I'm
not trying to call you out.
No. I just called myself out. But equally, I think, what I am pleased to be able to say is that I have a great level of compassion around my cancellation. And we're part of the other thing we've got these days is a thing called Zoom, and if COVID didn't gift us anything, but if we've garnered anything from COVID, is that Zoom has become ubiquitous in the modern life, and most people, and I've got a number of neurodiverse, disabled, students, they all know how to use Zoom, and we've used that to great facility as a result. So really interesting discussion about what does it mean to be inclusive. Just because we're nearly out of time, in fact we're out of time, but before we do, let's let's finish off by in a sense, that now turning it so that we're looking from the viewpoint of the student, of the singer. How does the singer, you know, become more inclusive in their own, you know, stepping into the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the answer to that is the same as the answer to becoming a person with more agency just in general, you know, becoming a person who I detest deep inner work. Like, I hate it. So you know, becoming a person who really does that inner work, I detest it. But becoming a person who recognizes what, you know, what is happening in my own feelings and my own thoughts about myself, the way that I process, the way that I learn, and the music from a singing standpoint or a singing student standpoint, the music that I love to sing and why, and what do I want to communicate? You know, what do I have to say? What is my great why for singing and for taking singing lessons or for studying singing? What is my great why? What is the deepest why? And teasing that out a little bit and recognizing it and affirming it in myself, and also giving myself the agency and the permission if you need it, but I'll give you the permission if you need it, but giving myself the permission to ask for, to first of all, as a woman, to be allowed to ask for something and to be allowed to want something, first of all, and then secondly, to have the permission to ask for what I want. So then you're coming into a voice lesson, and you know, obviously there are ways to parse, and there are ways to talk to voice teachers and colleagues and whoever you're working with, but coming into a voice lesson situation with either a deep understanding of what you want to communicate and how you learn, and how you process, and being able to say, I want to learn to sing, or better, I'm taking voice lessons, let's put it that way. I'm taking voice lessons because I want to be more confident, because I don't always feel that I'm being heard in my life, and I would like to be heard better, and so I would like to have more confidence in my voice, and I'm hoping that voice lessons are going to help with that. So being able to come into a lesson, obviously not everyone is going to be able to do that, and not every singer is going to be able to do that, but coming into a lesson with as much of that knowledge of who you are as possible, and with as much acceptance of who you are as possible, as well as, again, coming into a lesson and saying, I would like to have as much agency as possible in this relationship, and being able to articulate what you want. And also, like I said, having the permission to want as well. So that, I think that, you know, the whole reason that we are starting to have this neurodiversity paradigm, where we're starting to see neurodiversity affirming literature and voices, and the whole reason we have that is because autistic adults are saying, you know what, I deserve to be heard, and I deserve to not be misunderstood in this world, and I deserve to, you know, if I'm not meeting your eye when I talk to you, I still deserve the respect and understanding that I am still listening to you, and I'm not being disrespectful, and that I am processing in a different way. And so people, especially autistic adults, saying, this is what I want out of this world, and these are the ways that I want things to change. Now, again, I don't want everything to be on the person to have to, to have to advocate for themselves. That is part of the reason that I do what I do, is to say, hey, voice teachers, this isn't all up to the singer that you're working with to tell you what they need, but if it's possible for you as a singer to come in, even just with that kernel of like, here's what I want to communicate, and here's my deep why for taking voice lessons. Even children have a deep why for taking voice lessons. Yeah. Sometimes it's just because their parents want them to, but even children will have a deep why at some point in their lives for taking voice lessons. Yeah. So understanding that as you're coming into voice lessons, and just as a person, understanding what you have to say and knowing that you have the permission and the right to want a thing.
We have two founding statements of singing faith here at Voice Essentials, and one is it's the birthright of every human being to sing, and the second is every voice deserves to be heard. They are, and that, is exactly what you're saying, is that you do deserve to be heard. So many people, and I don't think you have to be from a minority group to even feel like you don't have the right to sing. But actually, everyone has the right to sing because firstly it's your birthright, and your story deserves to be told. And that's so important. You
deserves to be told in the way that you want
choose
to tell it.
Yes. Yeah. Love the addition. Yeah. Very true. We're over time. So we do.
That is a shock. That is shocking to me that we went over time.
No one who has been watching this show long enough, where you and I have sat and had a chin wag, is shocked at all by the fact that we've gone over. But we do have to bring it to a close because it is about to turn midnight in your part of the world. And I've got a student that's about to knock on the door, so I do have to finish up. Thank you for coming on and giving us a little sneak peek of the ANATS talk that you'll be giving. And I know that you'll be received so well when you give that. And this was number 6 with Dr. Shannon Coates on the Voice Essentials live hangout. I'm sure there'll be a 7, 8, and 9. But until that time, thanks once again, Shannon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Dan.
Oh, it's a lot of fun and really challenging one today. And there's certainly some food for thought for all of us in thinking through our approach and our sense of inclusivity towards others, but also the permissions that we do or don't provide ourselves when we approach this singing thing. Thank you again to Evo for the super chats. I saw your second one, Evo, but for some reason my system wouldn't allow me to bring that second one in. But I do appreciate it, Evo, as you know. Next week we're doing a Q&A. So make sure you come next week with your questions. If you've enjoyed today's live hangout, and why wouldn't have you, hit the thumbs up button, let us know. Make sure you subscribe, hit the white bell icon, you'll get the notifications for when we go live every Monday, 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, because next week is a Q&A, but in 2 weeks' time we've got Dr. Trinice Robinson-Martin coming on. She's going to be talking to us, in one sense, about a minority group. We're going to be talking about soul singing and R&B, but she really comes at it from that Afro-American culture, and we're going to learn so much. Trinice has been on the show before, and she's a powerhouse. So I really want you to come on and join us for what will be a fantastic show. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you then. But until we see each other next time, I'm Dr. Dan. Sing well.